Okay, ZOT. The Tower of ZOT. It's the first dungeon in Endwalker. It's level 81, and while I'm showing footage that I've kind of zoomed out to make it kind of hide, hopefully, a little bit more of like people's names and all that, we're not here to talk spoilers. We're here to talk about why the first and lowest level dungeon in Endwalker is making me well over 100,000 gil per hour in today's market. Tower of ZOT is not really remarkable when you break down what Tower of ZOT is made of. First of all, it has trash. Trash drops really no experience or loot anymore. That's all tied to bosses now. It has 3 bosses, and it has optional loot chests. If I say those things, that describes just about every 4-man dungeon in the game, especially after I think it's like Heaven's Word, where trash basically becomes unskippable. Kind of just is what it is. So where does the money come from? Well, first, run ZOT. You gotta run it a lot. I've run it as every role. I ran it with random people, so odds are these people don't know who I was or what I was gathering data on, unless maybe they recognized it or I was streaming and somebody like queued for it at the same time as me. So as best as possible, these runs are just random groups of people. I rolled greed on all gear. I never rolled need, even when it was my role. So your results should be as good or better than mine, because if you want to roll need, that's available to you, and then that really increases the likelihood that you get that loot in your role, especially if you're like a tank where like there aren't other tanks to roll against you. My number today is much lower than if I had taken this earlier in the expansion. My loot is valued on Sargatanas, which is one of the lowest priced ones on my data center typically. And this is based on today's numbers. So I kept track of all the loot, and then I put all the loot in there, and then I went and I re-updated the market board values on all my loot today. And that is what spit out the number that is on the thumbnail that is going with this. My longest run took over half an hour. It was just painfully slow. My fastest group almost slid down to the 20-minute mark. But on average, this is taking me just over 26 minutes to get it clear. I'm an exceedingly average player, and so I believe in you, especially if you're doing this with like a pre-made, you can blow through this. I cannot assume your wait times, so this is only in ZOT time. Your time outside of ZOT, you should be doing something else that makes you gil while you wait. Or if you're the adventurer in need, there is no wait, and so it's no big deal. Clearing the dungeon on its own, just upon the completion, is giving you 4,800 gil. So that is over 9,000 gil per hour on its own, because we've got over 2 runs per hour. 4,800 times 2 is well over 9,000. It's over 9,000. So the amount of gear that dropped did vary per run. But on average, I was getting around at least 10 pieces. It was over 10 pieces, and I had a chance at a rare wind-up minion. But step 1 is you have to be rolling on everything. You have to roll on everything. I was rolling on everything, and across that total amount of loot, I should really only be getting 25%, right? Or less if people are rolling need. I was getting over 60% of all loot that dropped in my 4-man groups across my total number of runs. Sometimes that was not very much. Sometimes I was only getting a couple of pieces. But there were some runs where I literally got every single thing that dropped. There were other runs where like 11 pieces dropped and I got 9 of them. So on average, I was getting 60% of the loot from 4 people. Because people aren't rolling on things. With over 2 runs per hour, this means that I'm easily clearing a dozen pieces of loot per hour. However, if you mouse over dungeon loot, it is unique and untradeable. Very few exceptions to that, meaning no repeats can be in my inventory at any time in ZOT, or I won't be able to roll on that one. And I cannot sell this on the market board as it sits. I can't just go sell this gear, as opposed to something like the WoW transmog market, where there's a value to that with BOE pieces. With an average vendor cost of over 800, if you just vendored all the loot you're getting every single time, I don't want to deal with it, you just vendored it. You're getting, between the completion gil and this, you're getting over 22,500 gil per hour just from vendoring the loot and completing the dungeon. So, if you're making less than 22,000 per hour, you're missing something. You're leaving money on the table. But if you've ever messed with crafting, we could descent this to push it a little bit higher. Early in the expansion, this was insane. I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of gil per hour. At one point, my spreadsheet said that I was making over 1 million per hour running Tower of ZOT in the early days. So maybe around patch times and stuff, that goes back up. But I am talking about today's numbers, mid-cycle, nothing spectacular. This would push the gear from 11.6 per hour in vendor to 17.2k from decent value. So that jumps you already up to 28,000 gil per hour. So we're getting closer, but we're a ways off of that big shiny over 100,000 number. Hardly what made you click on the thumbnail. Now we also need to sell that minion. I've seen that minion get down into, the 10k range. It hasn't really sat there anymore as the number of ZOT runs drops off. But I've seen it as high as 6 digits. I doubt it'll get that high again. Currently on my server, it's sitting in the upper 50s. Because people pass on it once they have that minion, with my luck, as I'm seeing it drop, that adds 81,000 or 8,100 gil per hour to my runs. It's not dropping every time, but when it is dropping, I'm getting it more than my fair share. After that, look to retainers. Gear, when turned into your grand company, gives seals based on the item level. So when we're talking about endwalker dungeons during endwalker, these are some of the highest seal sources that you're really going to easily get your hands on. This is over 25,000 seals per hour, since they're 1,761 apiece, if we're not vendoring or descenting them. Now, yes, you can descent in the dungeon. So if a duplicate drops within a run, descent the one, grab the greed roll, and that is what it is. But if you're turning these all in for seals, it's over 25,000 seals per hour. 25,000 is a lot. Now, if you've messed around with squadrons at all, you've run your 5 unique squadron missions, you could turn these into loot boxes at 20,000 seals each and get minions and mounts. Those can be crazy money. They were incredible money early on, like at least 100,000 gil per box when you averaged across several boxes, because you were occasionally getting something worth crazy numbers. But it's likely maybe still good, especially if you're like just doing it once or twice and you get really lucky. I don't know, because I did one squadron dungeon and they weren't for me, and maybe someday in the future I'll do that, maybe. So what do you spend seals on then? Well, it's going to depend. It's going to depend a lot on your server. On some servers, relic items are doing okay, depending on how many people are in that market and how many people are making old relics. I keep an eye on adamantite Francescas, titanium alloy mirrors, dispelling arrows, and king's cake, and I have a spreadsheet. I plug in the current value. It tells me which one is the best seal to gil ratio. Sometimes I'm spending that on glamour prisms or dispellers. Cordials occasionally spike, though they're rarely anything too impressive. But the thing that drove my math so far is that lately, sourcing my retainers into targeting specific valuable things, which are not always current expansion, I am making at least 1,000 gil per venture, sending them out for things of value. I'd love to dive into this further and see how high I could drive this number up. But if I set that as my floor, because I've looked back over my recent vendor things, it's never less than 1,000 per venture. If I plug just 1,000 in there, my seals per hour is already up to 125,000 gil per hour. Every single hour I spend in ZOT. Now, this is across a very small number of runs. I've run 16 runs to get this math as far as what is recorded in the spreadsheet. That's the numbers where like things started leveling a little bit. Maybe they would have continued moving, but like I noticed numbers started. Now we're seeing smaller adjustments. I plug in a new run and it moves it by a couple hundred gil per hour out of thousands and thousands. So unless there's something weird happening, I'd love to have 10,000 runs worth of data. I just don't. But if I ran all 16 runs today, and I valued it at today's numbers, that is 2.2 million gil. Now, it would take me 6 or 7 hours or whatever that math is, but it's 2.2 million gil, which is a number that I know many people come to my gil guides and say they could never imagine having. This is not hard content. It's not boring content. It's dungeon content. It's battle content. It's easy to get to. It grants incredible amounts of experience to your level 80, 81, or 81 and 82 jobs. And at 61,000 gil per run, not a big deal if it shows up in a leveling roulette. Since a pair of runs is taking less than an hour and give almost a full level of experience if you're 81 or 82, this is millions of gil while you're trying to get to 83 and unlock that next dungeon. ZOT is not the best gil by any stretch, but for dungeon content, right? A lot of times when we talk about, oh, you got to gather, you got to mutamix or whatever, people say that's boring. This is battle content, and it gives reasonable experience if you still need experience from it. And it's current expansion content in the current expansion, so it's not like, oh, I've already done that 10,000 times. This is great. If you were already doing all this and you just never added up the money, you already got your money, and congratulations, assuming you'd been rolling greed or need. But you just got to use it on seals. Got to keep your retainers going. Send them out. Send them out for an hour while you go, and then come back and send them out again. And this is incredible. The retainers are getting you fantastic loot while you run dungeons, and Tower of ZOT is giving you more ventures than you can possibly use. We can talk about what to do with ventures after you've filled up on ventures and you want to keep running ZOT, you want to keep getting more, and you're gaining ventures faster than you can use them. But for somebody that just runs dungeons casually, this should kind of keep the venture goblin at bay there, and allows them to kind of do the real work, and that your retainers are now being powered by ZOT. Kinda.